For a hand scratching my scalp and for a kiss against my forehead. By Weird_O. Chapter 3. I hope you might catch it. Trigger warnings may include child abuse, physical child abuse, racism, and mentions of drug use. Peter's day had been terrible. He had been late and had run into his father, who had been freshly back from a business trip and very pissed. The man had hissed insults under his breath as he passed it to him before loudly slamming the door of the bathroom, making Peter wince at the deafening sound. He didn't eat because he was late and had been nauseous all morning because of the lack of food. Flash had shoved him against the locker and Peter had come so close to revealing his secret identity by punching Flash's teeth out of his face. But he didn't. He kept it together with deep breaths and a shaky exhalation. He had felt the anxiety build up in his stomach all day and had been almost tempted to ask MJ if she wanted to go outside and share a blunt behind the school, but he had finally decided against it. He still had to go to his internship before he could collapse somewhere, turn his brain off, and not move for the entire weekend. And if he was lucky, he could then hope to find some sleep. He looked up at the tower. It was the 4th time that he had come. 5th if you counted his appointment with Mrs. Potts. On his first day, Mr. Stark made him pass tests. He never gave him the results, but he had looked at him, had patted him on the shoulder, and had whispered, "Damn kid, you and I are going places." So Peter had assumed his results were good. He was tempted to ask the man for his results, just because it would be good for his self-esteem or whatever. Peter took pride in his intelligence. He wasn't Spider-Man because he was special. He just happened to get bit. It could have been anyone behind his mask. The only thing special about him was his brain, and he took great pride in it. Maybe he should go ask for his results. He slid his badge into the scanner, walking through the gateway as the computer next to it showed his name with a neon blue light. He had 1 day of internship every week. The Friday from after class until the night had fallen on New York. Then Mr. Stark would make one of his security guards drive him home. It wasn't their job, but no one complained. The following week, if Mr. Stark decided he wanted to maintain the internship, Peter would get a real badge. He really hoped he would. He had seen interns a bit older than him with the royal blue metal badges. Their names were carved deep into the metal. He wanted that. He walked into the elevator, taking a deep breath. His stomach was still full with the anxiety he had fought all day, and he was scared he would snap at Mr. Stark, snarky comments, or burst into tears. He wasn't sure. He didn't know how to feel about the man. Even 4 weeks deep into his internship, he was confused. This man was a genius. Of course, he was. Everyone knew that. But he really freaking was. Peter could see it in his eyes. The way they would roll on blueprints, on equations, and Mr. Stark would come up with answers without even having to think. The way his brain pushed in directions nobody had thought of going, and it made Peter uneasy. Everything he said, in the lab at least, was full of sense, and it was almost like he was never making mistakes. Like he had la science infuse, infinite knowledge and understanding of his world. Mrs. Stark was a genius. That was a fact. Yet the man often looked troubled, his eyebrows crooking in a weird way when Peter would say he was grateful to be in the lab next to him, as if he wasn't sure if he understood Peter right. When they would playfully bicker, Mr. Stark would suddenly still a little, and his hands would twitch, brown eyes hovering on Peter's, almost in wonder. He looked at Peter as if he didn't understand him fully, as if a weird equation couldn't figure out, with too many factors and not enough time to solve it. Peter hummed quietly as the doors of the elevator opened. He could only guess that he was confusing Mrs. Stark, which, in itself, was very preposterous, and an almost obnoxious claim. The man was a genius, after all. He read people like he read blueprints, which he did really well, and Peter couldn't have been an exception to this rule. Yet, it seemed he was. He was confusing Tony Stark. He was confusing something in Tony Stark's brain. Ah, isn't that my favorite intern? Peter's head jolted up from his thoughts as Mrs. Stark called him. The room had gained some life. There was no more dust on the screens, and now there was mechanical oil on the floor. Just a bit. The stains of their project from the week before. You only have one intern, Mr. Stark, Peter huffed, leaving his bag next to the door, walking towards the billionaire who was sitting at his desk, a hologram deployed in front of him. If you count all the interns of this tower, I'm pretty sure I have more than one, Mr. Stark responded, a small smirk on his lips. Pushing his rolling chair away from the desk to turn to Peter, the teen forced a smile out of his lips at the joke, anxiety making his gut twist. God, he needed a Xanax or something strong enough to shoot this anxiety away for at least a little bit. Mrs. Stark was looking at him for maybe a second longer than usual, and Peter knew he could tell something was wrong. Maybe it was the way he was a little more curled in on himself than usual, or how his lashes were dragging his eyelids down, too heavy for him to keep up. The man cleared his throat, bending back on his Stark pad, sketching the frame of an idea, just like he had incited Peter to do every time he had an interesting thought. The air was a bit tense, a bit awkward, and Peter knew it was his fault as much as it was Mr. Stark's fault. Neither of them were good with emotions, weren't they? Is everything all right, kid? The man tried, clearing his throat, pretending to be focused on his sketch. Peter's heart sank a little, and he felt like crying just a little bit. He chewed on his lip, rolling the flesh between his teeth. He would do the favor to Mr. Stark of not crying in front of him. He sniffled quietly, blinking away the braining of his eyes. Yeah, just a rough day, you know? He said, biting away the small bloom that was telling him to spill his heart out. He wouldn't, as much as he craved for the intimacy the comfort of talking to someone would give him. He couldn't bring himself to do so. Throat tight, the skin of his face uncomfortable around his cheek. I am not the best at that kind of talk, Mr. Stark sighed, letting go of his digital pen and turning into his chair to look at Peter. But you know, kid, you can talk to me, all right? I know you are clever enough to understand that. Peter nodded his head quickly in a sharp and small nods. His dark eyes huge as he looked at Mr. Stark in almost wonder. There was something about this man. He was soft but rough, understanding but stern, mocking but kind. Peter's fingers tapped against his thigh. The man had this little gentle toughness that left Peter confused, but somehow comforted. A small, tentative smile twitched on his lips. That day, when he left the tower, he left with Mr. Stark's personal phone number registered in his phone and a new blue and gold metal badge that Mr. Stark had given him early. His father was looking at him from the opposite side of the table. Peter was trying hard to focus on the lukewarm food on his plate. The table was silent, his brother, his sister, and his mother eating quietly. They had talked for a bit, just pretending to keep up with each other, and then it was silent again. The radio resonating in the background, just loud enough for everybody to hear what was said, but not loud enough to cover the conversation that would have taken place. Peter could feel his father's eyes, and his presence was only making his skin crawl and his stomach tighten, his teeth creaking as he clenched his jaw. And as we're talking about Tony Stark's next charity gala, will have a goal to sponsor the creation of universities in Central African Republic, and will allow 100 students to win a scholarship, which will be paid by the Stark Industries itself. The radio sang, and an ugly, mocking noise formed in his father's throat, a mix of a laugh and a hiss. "Isn't that your friend?" he said, looking at Peter with those eyes that made him want to jump out of a window without his web shooters. please, not today. I don't want to fight, Peter whined. Face crisped, eyes closed, voice tightened by lassitude as he looked down at his plate. He knew exactly what was going to happen. His father would make a comment, then another one, until Peter snapped and fought back, and then they would yell. All I'm saying, his father spat, is that he should be helping real white Americans instead of those people, he said, almost reluctant, as if the word people was bruising his mouth. Peter's hands clenched around his fork. If he wanted to get good karma points, maybe he should help his own country instead of helping those... Oh my God, what is wrong with you? Peter snapped, cutting his father, his head rising up, his eyes opening. Why are you like this? Why can't you just shut up for once? Oops, bad move. Poor Peter. Excuse me? His father said, voice loud, fixing Peter in the eyes. The thing Peter hated the most about his father was the way he was always looking at him, just because all Peter always saw was the hate the man had, boiling in him. What did you just say to me? I told you to shut up, Peter hissed. Don't you talk to me like that, his father said back, screaming, getting up so quickly from his seat that Peter flinched away, convinced that the man was going to hit him. You don't talk about people like this. You don't understand because you are a spoiled little kid, his father hissed between his teeth, with so much hatred that Peter felt like he was suffocating a bit. You don't know nothing. All you do is sit around rotting away your brain on social media and see the results. You are fucking manipulated by those people and you can't even see it because you are too fucking dumb. He yelled, his hands going up in the air, making large motions that were driving Peter's spidey senses crazy. Was he going to hit him or not? Language! His mother cut, looking at her husband, because of course that is what she was worried about. Peter got up, leaving his half-empty plate on the table. I'm done, he spat. You come back here, sit back down. I am not. His father got up, trailing after him, his body large and menacing in front of Peter. Adrenaline was beating into Peter's temples. You sit down, he hissed, hands in the air, hovering over Peter's face, fingers hard, calloused, and ready to slap into his skin. Jeez, all right, Peter breathed, raising up both his hands. His father in front of him. He was scared. He was so scared. He was so scared. He sat down, looking at his plate, not hungry anymore. His brother and his sister were quiet, not looking at him. They were used to it. Finish your food. As if, Peter snorted. Later, when Peter crawled into his room, he closed the door with a shaky breath, locking behind him. He sat in a corner for a second, curled in on himself, taking one exaggerated breath and then another. Slowly, his fingers dragged through his hair and scratching his skull. It was fine. He was fine. Nothing unusual. His father was just an angry man. He got up, dragging his suit from underneath his bed, hands still a bit shaky from adrenaline. He wished his father could learn like Tony Stark did, like the man did after Afghanistan. He wished his father cared about him enough to make compromises instead of trying so hard to push his opinions on him. He wished his father would try to change, to be better for him, perhaps kinder, less angry. But he didn't, and never would. All Peter had was his eyes to cry. See, this is what I don't understand, dude, Peter sang from behind his mask. His voice was a bit muffled and a bit lower than it usually was. Peter was upside down, trying to converse with a man he had just webbed to a wall. Like, come on, look at you. You are tall, you have muscles. If there was nothing in your head, you could find a job. I don't know, maybe not something really entertaining, but you did know that garbage collector salaries are like huge. You could do that, and like, okay, I know it's complicated to find a job. I know, I've tried. But look at you. You are a grown man. You wouldn't have any trouble. Me? I am slight. I look weak. Nobody wants me as a garbage collector. Oh, Oh, I know what you could do. You could be a bodyguard. It would suit you, following orders, not too much thinking to do for your small brain. The man cried out from behind the web in his mouth, outraged. Not very different from your current job, is it? Huh. Peter hummed, his smile a little crooked under his mask. Not that the car thief would see that. Why don't you tell me who gives you the orders, so I can send them my regards? He whispered, tone clever, carnival, and a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he sounded like Mr. Stark. Peter crawled closer to the man, his movement disturbingly close to the one of an actual spider. Police sirens resonated at the end of the dark wood alley. "Aw, man," Peter sighed. "Guess that's where we say goodbye. Have fun with the police officers. Maybe you can ask them if they are searching for a bodyguard," he joked, swinging off when shouts at the end of the alley. Laughter was tingling in the back of his throat as he was feeling much better than he did a few hours before. Patrolling tended to have this effect on his brain. Punch and web up a few people, and he was usually feeling more calm, less stressed. Maybe his father had a point when he broke things or sent his foot in Peter's stomach. Every time he got too angry. Wait, no, he shouldn't joke about that. From the top of the building, Peter looked down at the police officers in the wet alley underneath. Flashlights were pointed towards the criminals. His face wrinkled, his eyes closed under the bundles of light, and Peter was slightly amused by the cries of annoyance he could hear from the officers. His webs were really difficult to undo, and usually they had a cop staying on the scene until the webs had dissolved, which Peter felt a bit guilty about. But he guessed it was his revenge for all the times they had shot at him. He let a small sigh escape his lips as his gaze drifted over New York. It was the fourth car thief he had stopped this week. For some reason, he kept finding them, or they kept finding him, probably all working for the same person. They had similar profiles, usually males in their late 30s to early 50s, with little to no close relatives, a circle tattooed behind their right ear. They always stole the same type of cars too, in the same areas of Queen. Peter always let them steal the car first, and then chased after them, getting them out of the car, sweeping them up, calling the cops eventually. The car would be reported stolen by the owners, and the police officers would have their proof and the robber. Yeah, good plan. Good job, Spider-Man. Except it wasn't enough. The more men he was getting arrested, the more cars were getting stolen. For weeks now, he had been trying to find something, anything that could lead him to someone higher than those thieves. But no, nothing. Peter was going insane, and worst, he could feel that something was wrong about this whole thing, that there was something way bigger. Why would car thieves would have the same tattoo as if they were in a gang? What was so special about them specifically? He didn't know yet, but he would find out.